Secretary Pompeo, I think to his great credit, was in the process of reorienting U.S. foreign policy around the China challenge. And it was my job as head of policy planning to assist him in that reorientation. In fact, out of that work came a paper that the policy planning staff published called The Elements of the China Challenge. In addition, Secretary Pompeo created a Commission on Unalienable Rights. I served as the executive secretary of that commission, and we produced a second, I think it's fair to call it, major paper on rights in the American constitutional tradition and the implications for U.S. foreign policies.
We are very honored to welcome Peter Berkowitz to the Horizontal Conversations podcast. We're sitting here on a Zoom call. Peter, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from my Hoover Institution office in Washington, D.C. Hoover, as you know, is located at Stanford University, but I man the fort here in the belly of the beast in Washington, D.C.
Awesome.
So, as a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, what are you doing these days? What takes up a lot of your time? I know you write some columns. I know you appear on a lot of podcasts. What is your focus?
So a big part of what I do these days is write a weekly column for Real Clear Politics, and in that column I really cover 3, maybe 4 broad areas. I write a lot about political ideas, right and left. I write a lot about the sorry state of liberal education in the United States. I write a lot about Israel, a country to which I travel typically about 4 times a year. And as a result of my State Department service from 2019 to 2021, I also write these days about a lot about the China challenge. So 4 broad areas. It keeps me very busy.
Very apropos to a lot of the things that we're thinking of. So we're glad that you're an expert on these. But before we get into and unpack some of those key important pieces of our lives and culture, even here in America, we just want to get to know you a little bit better. So can you tell us, who are you, and tell us about your family and growing up? Well,
I've been around for a while, so it's a long story, but I will start with my childhood. I was born on the south side of Chicago. At a tender age, my parents kidnapped me, my older brother, and 2 younger sisters and took us to the suburbs of Chicago. We moved to a place called Deerfield, which when we moved there was a place very close to fields with deer in them. That is, they were the outer edge of the Chicago suburbs back then. This was the 1960s. And now they've been cased by many more rings of Chicago suburbs. So I grew up there. My parents were my father passed away. My mother is still alive. When I was growing up, they were very ordinary liberal Democrats. Politics was seldom discussed at our dinner table. We belonged to I'll call it an ultra-reform synagogue. Why do I say ultra-reform? Because the rabbi was determined to expel all mentions of God from high holiday services and all other services at the synagogue. I went away to college at a small college called Swarthmore College. In college, I was exposed to some extraordinary professors. They opened my eyes to some of the deficiencies of modern life. They sparked an interest in religion, including Israel. I graduated immediately upon graduating from college. I traveled to Israel for an adventure, applying the one trade I knew at the time, which was teaching tennis. I got myself a job on a kibbutz, now a famous kibbutz. It's called Kibbutz Niram. It's part of Otef Aza. It's on the northeast corner of the Gaza Strip. I taught tennis there for a while, made great friends. To make a long story short, I eventually studied for a year at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, uh, continued my interest in Jewish thought, in the Jewish tradition, in philosophy. Um, Came back to the United States and Hebrew. Study of Hebrew was very important to me. Came back to the United States. I studied political science and law at Yale, went on to teach for about a decade at Harvard University, got into a big fight with the university, went on to teach law at George Mason University Law School. And about a little over 20 years ago, I joined the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. I became a senior fellow, which has given me an opportunity to write uh, widely about issues of politics and ideas as I see fit. I'm very grateful to Hoover for that. Although I have opted to stay in Washington, D.C., rather than join the vast majority of my colleagues at Stanford University. So there you go, several decades in about 3 minutes.
That's beautiful. You mentioned in college, like some awakening, Jewish awakening, political awakening. What can you put your finger on it? What was it that made you want to connect so Jewishly?
Yeah, although because of the way you asked the question reminded me of really a formative moment that took place before college. But I won't dodge the question. I'll answer about college. But I now remember.
Tell us about before college also, for sure.
Yes. So it was Yom Kippur. I must have been 12 or 13, eighth grade. And my intramural football team, Yom Kippur, was playing a crucial game. And I was determined to play in that game. My father was strongly opposed. But there he was. It was Yom Kippur. We were in the suburbs. It was a hot and humid Chicago afternoon. And he was sitting in a comfortable chair on the porch, his shirt unbuttoned. We had come lounging. We had come from synagogue in the morning. And it made no sense to my 13-year-old self that if my father could be lounging like this, I had heard that Yom Kippur was, of course, the holiest day in the year. But, we'd come from services. I heard something about Freud. I heard something about Alvin Toffler and future shock during the sermon. It made no sense to me that I should put aside something as important as playing in this football game. And in fact, my father ultimately acquiesced, but I could see real pain in his face when he did. And that stayed with me. And as I got older, it occurred to me that he could see that I was breaking in a serious way with something important, even sacred, but he didn't have the language to explain it to me. So in part was I wanted to understand what was being, and my father would have never used the term, but desecrated by me on that day. And of course, part of the answer was why I did this is partly because of how I was raised, because I wasn't given any serious acquaintance with the splendors of the Jewish tradition. So this stayed with me for a long time, and in college, I had some wonderful teachers who introduced me both to the Enlightenment, to the basic principles, let's call it a liberal modernity, in less grandiose terms, the principles that undergird the American experiment in order to deliver an American constitutional government. And bless the souls of my teachers, I was also exposed to the critique of that form of life, our form of life. And one part of the critique proclaimed that we had arrogantly and short-sightedly uh, rejected many traditional truths, many bodies of wisdom. One of those, the two most prominent, um, pre-modern classical political philosophy, and the second, biblical faith. So I got it in my head as a college student that I needed to learn more about those two sources of our civilization, really, classical political philosophy and biblical faith. Uh, Being Jewish, biblical faith, that's a big subject. Being Jewish, I thought, why don't I start with my own? And classical political philosophy, well, I've been studying it ever since.
It's beautiful that I guess it was an open-ended challenge almost that kind of set you off and was the catalyst for your connection with our deeper connection with our people, and also the look on your father's face.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
beautiful.
Yes, I'm not. I doubt I fully appreciated that the quest I set out on, was not a 1 year, 2 year, 5 year undertaking, but a lifelong undertaking. Yes.
So when you went to Israel and you're playing tennis and you're learning Hebrew and you're studying at Hebrew University and all that, what was bring us there? What was happening to you, and
Yes.
and how did that transform you?
I'll tell you, so I've told it before. I don't remember whether on a podcast, but it was instructive. It was a kind of introduction to Israel because I arrived in Israel having read Exodus and having read The Source by James Michener, but but lacking background. And I didn't know Hebrew. I knew only a few words of Hebrew. Could I read? I probably learned the alphabet. I had learned the alphabet before I arrived, but I was determined to learn the language. So my first job, as I mentioned, was on a kibbutz. My only job, I suppose, in Israel, teaching tennis on kibbutz. Um, I was determined to learn the language. I got children's books, and I got verb tables and dictionaries, and I would take time in the tennis lessons to ask the students questions. I learned words here and there, and the students, the kids, they actually enjoyed it because from their point of view, the 8 years olds, the 9 year olds, the 10 year olds, I was some, old dude, this 22-year-old guy who couldn't speak the language. So it was fun for them to teach me words. It was fun for me to teach them tennis. But keep in mind, it's summertime after I've graduated. It's hot in the Negev in summertime. Tennis lessons don't take place until 5 p.m. They didn't take place until 5 p.m. after the sun had begun to set. So I had days to fill up. How did I fill up my days? I would rise, not as early as everybody else, but especially the men who worked in the fields, but around 6:15, and I would catch a bus at the junction. At the time, it was an empty junction. There were two streets that met all around you fields. And I would catch a bus for a 2.5 hour commute to Jerusalem. By car, it's about 50 minutes. By bus, it was 2.5 hours. And I would get myself to a yeshiva, probably known to you guys, called Or Sameach, which specialized in introducing ignorant, naive, and idealistic young Americans who know nothing to the Jewish tradition. And they performed that service for me. However, they were perplexed because after after a morning of study and a lunch, I don't have to tell you, of boiled chicken and rice, I would depart and head back to the kibbutz in order to another 2.5 hour ride, in order to arrive in time to teach tennis at 5. Well, this went on for a couple of months, and finally, in exasperation, one of the rabbis at Or Sameach asked me, where was I living? Why didn't I stay at the yeshiva? Why didn't I study all day? Uh, and by this time, I knew that my answer would be received as somewhat problematic. But somewhat problematic does not do justice to the look of shock and horror on the rabbi's face when I explained that I was returning to a kibbutz. Um, it, I might have told him as I was returning to a prison for those accused of the most serious sorts of crimes. In fact, during that first day in Israel, maybe ever, the only other time I saw a look of such horror on a person's face in response to something I said was when I told a kibbutznik where I was spending my daylight hours. So this provided me with an extremely valuable introduction to divisions within Israeli society. Now, of course, it was a division that in my own innocent way I had rejected. There I was happy to be teaching tennis on the kibbutz and receiving an introduction to Gemara in Jerusalem. But those who were introducing me to kibbutz life and those who were introducing me to traditional Jewish life were not at all happy. They were shocked and appalled, as interested in the other. So that experience obviously has stayed with me, and so has the conviction that bridging those different worlds is good in itself, and something that we should all do our best to foster.
It's attainable, I guess. You were able to do it early on. Is that something you've been continuing to do?
Yes, I suppose, but I should make clear that hardly anybody I know is very satisfied with that. My people I know learn to live with this, but the people on the various sides are made quite uneasy by sadly they sometimes think of it as fraternizing with the enemy.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's part of the challenges that we have. How did those formative experiences stay with you and inform you as you ended up with such an important position, the director of policy planning, which essentially is the direct assistant to the Secretary of State. It was Secretary of State Pompeo during the Trump administration. How did those experiences in Israel, because obviously Israel was front and center in those years, how did that play out in your thinking?
Well, I was originally asked to join the policy planning staff to serve as an advisor to Secretary Pompeo on Israel questions. You all recall that the White House, Trump 1, the White House more or less retained the Israel portfolio. Senior advisor Jared Kushner was in charge of drafting a peace plan, and of course Secretary Pompeo was in the loop, but still it was led by Kushner. Secretary Pompeo did not put full faith and trust and credit in the officials inside the State Department. And so he wanted someone independent on his team, close to him, who could write memos for him, what's happening in politics, and also offer some independent thoughts on the Kushner peace plan, be a sounding board, um, be where necessary critical. So I joined the policy planning staff in a part-time basis. The State Department is only about a mile walk from my Hoover office. I worked at the beginning 3 days a week, 9 to 5, more or less. At 5 p.m., I would walk a mile to my Hoover office where I'm sitting now.
Is that where you, is that in the Hoover office? Is that where you play tennis or no?
No tennis. Although, as you can imagine, back on campus, there's no shortage of beautiful tennis courts. Anyway, the not long into my time as a part-time member of the policy planning staff, the then head of the policy planning staff got herself fired. Pompeo needed to replace the head of the policy planning staff quickly. We had developed a rapport and some trust. I already had security clearance. The path of least resistance was, I guess, to ask me to run the office. I said yes. I said it would be an honor, though I accepted with a certain trepidation. But primarily because while I had acquired something of an expertise in Israel and Israel-related affairs, and I didn't really think of myself as a old foreign policy hand. In any case, I accepted the generous offer. Once I was installed as head of the policy planning, I more or less set aside the Israel portfolio for two reasons. One, I now had an office to run. There were 30 people or so in the office. Each person, most of the people had expertise in different areas of the world. It was the job of the office to provide the secretary with continuing advice and oversight about American policy in these regions. So that oversight took some time. Plus, Secretary Pompeo, I think to his great credit, was in the process of reorienting U.S. foreign policy around the China challenge. And it was my job as head of the policy planning to assist him in that reorientation. In fact, out of that work came a paper that the policy planning staff published called The Elements of the China Challenge. In addition, Secretary Pompeo created a Commission on Unalienable Rights. I served as the executive secretary of that commission, and we produced a second, I think it's fair to call it major paper on rights in the American constitutional tradition and the implications for U.S. foreign policy. So it was a busy time as head of policy planning, but I did get to observe from a distance the continuation of Kushner's efforts to secure a peace deal, the failure of that peace deal, and the emergence out of that failure of a great achievement, namely the Abraham Accords.
Wow. Kol hakavod.
Toda.
What does your mom think about you joining the State Department?
Yes. So my parents, in their way, were always encouraging to me. And let's just say that they were puzzled by this turn of events. And in one sense, of course, it was puzzling. I was when this came about, I was minding my own business. In fact, so much so that when I got the original call, it went like this. The then head of the policy planning staff said to me that Secretary Pompeo was looking for someone to advise him specifically on Israel, to which I immediately replied, "Terrific. Give me 3 days and I'll send you 3 or 4 names. I'm sure I know just the people." And I said, no, we want you. And my reaction was, well, that's impossible. I'm doing much too much right now, and you don't really need, so on. So it came as a surprise to me. It came as a surprise to my parents. And they more or less kept to their the attitude that they always expressed to me, which was if you choose it, we stand behind you. In other words, they were, I wouldn't say they were overwhelmed with pride. Um, on the other hand, they did not threaten to excommunicate me from the family either. They took it, let's say they took it in stride.
Very Maimonidean, very
Yeah.
center of the road. I find it really interesting that you came up in an era where many of your peers are teaching at these elite schools, as you did, and have sort of, joined the monoculture of the what do you call it? The liberal education follies that we're sort of
That
in.
works. That works.
Hey, yeah. How do you see this playing out? I mean, I have I guess I have a lot invested in it because I have young adult children, one of which is a freshman in college.
Oh, wow.
And another high school kid moving into college. And I've kept abreast of obviously what's going on with Jews on campuses. And I also watched the rise of the University of Austin, which is a really interesting turn of events, I think. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this topic, which I know is part of your
Yes.
focus now.
That's very important to me. Liberal education is another reason that I'm grateful to Swarthmore College, a small liberal arts college outside of Philadelphia, is because it educated me about the benefits of liberal education. It certainly opened my eyes, set me on a path, but it also helped me appreciate. Eventually, over the years, I looked back on that education and read more about the centrality to the American Republic of a decent liberal education. Maybe not for everybody, maybe college is not right for everybody, but for a not small number of people, education culminates in college education. And a liberal education is really an education for freedom. And America is devoted to individual freedom and human equality. And we ought to have the graduates of our colleges and universities ought to both understand the principles of freedom on which America rests, and also they should develop the virtues, the excellences of mind and character that enable them to benefit from freedom and exercise and fulfill the duties of free citizens. Liberal education plays a role in all that. So the degradation of liberal education is not merely about parents spending a lot of money for an education that leaves their children less wise and less knowledgeable and more hostile to the United States. It's not only about that, it's about undermining the prospects for the United States, because we need citizens who are both knowledgeable and bring to public life historical knowledge, toleration, civility, curiosity, the ability not only to express themselves, but the ability to listen to other opinions, the ability to discern the truth in opinions with which we disagree, the openness to learning about the weakness or wrongness of opinions to which we're devoted. All of this is what colleges should be teaching, and yet our colleges and universities, in my judgment, are teaching little of this. So a very serious problem for us.
It seems there's a failure in primary schools to even touch on civics in a lot of public schools, a lot of private schools. That this starts younger, possibly. The lack of fundamental understanding of, why virtue is an important element in our national structure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a liberal education does not begin in college. And again, liberal maybe is liberal education, maybe too fancy. We could cite an education for freedom. Uh, Literacy is part of the equipment we need in a free society. It begins with kindergarten, with grade school. And by the way, these days the problem is not merely an absence of civics, but teaching hostility to American principles from a very tender age. And Lord knows I am not suggesting that our schools should be cheerleaders for America. I want the facts about American history to be taught. I myself do think that the all the facts taken in their totality reflect very well on the United States of America. Warts and all, evils and all,
It
defects
still
and all.
leaves us with a lot to cheer for,
For
actually.
sure.
So,
For, yes, for sure. A good way to put it. Um, but but I think it is fair to begin at the beginning. We say you've got to learn to walk before you learn to run. We say in sports, actually, we say in most activities, you got to learn the fundamentals. But we learn critique before we learn anything about the basics and the achievements. This is not this is no longer learning, that's propagandizing, and it's propagandizing hostile to the interests of the nation when there's peculiar position in which the state pays for a public education, K through 12, and in colleges, some significant part of which is hostile to the regime's principles.
It's a conundrum.
do you see the current administration's moves as hopeful in the realm of education?
I do. Uh, s- uh, some of it may be eventually judged hasty. Um, some of it may be judged clumsy. But the driving concerns are fully justified concerns. Yes, Columbia University has become a hotbed of anti Semitism and anti Israelism. Now, you might say, well, some of that's opinion, and it's true, some of it's opinion, but a lot of it has been harassment, intimidation, and prevention of Jewish students from receiving the education that they paid for. Um, I see no reason why the federal government should subsidize such universities. I see good reason why funds should be withdrawn from those universities until they fulfill their own formal promises um, to provide an education and provide environments that are free from uh, again, harassment, intimidation, that, to use the technical language, that is so severe that it deprives students of basic educational opportunities.
So is tending to this in the realm of Columbia University just a band-aid for the outcrop of something much larger on a cultural level? And I'm thinking of that while I'm looking at your first book about Nietzsche, and that I confess to you that I have only read the introduction and a part of the conclusions. Why read the middle, right? No. But I got a sense that it was almost sort of looking towards how these concepts became so ingrained in the Western culture, vernacular, or semantics that it's leading towards this view of what we call now woke culture.
Yes.
Is there some line to draw from Nietzsche to our current cultural fissions?
Yes, and in two senses. I mean, one could go all the way back to the historical Nietzsche of the middle of the 19th century, writing about the decline of the West, the death of God, the impoverishment of philosophical reasoning from Plato to Kant. And happy to talk about that. But there's another dimension that it's prominent in the preface and in the introduction to the book, which is in the mid 1990s when the book was published, I was combating the tremendous upsurge of enthusiasm for Nietzsche in the academy, in my discipline, among left-wing academics. I thought they both did not understand Nietzsche's own hatred of the left. They did not understand his, not just of the left, of the contemporary right. His actually hatred of rights protecting democracy, nor did they understand the traditionalism that informed Nietzsche's thinking. I'll just give one example, which is maybe not so surprising given at the beginning of our conversation. Among the most famous passages in Nietzsche is a parable he tells of the death of God. Many 1990s thinkers, we call them postmodern thinkers, post-structuralist thinkers, saw this parable about the madman who proclaims the death of God as a moment of grace, signifying a moment of great liberation. As in Marx, finally we've sloughed off the dead snakeskin of religion, and we can assume our true roles, unburdened by superstition, and fully achieve what Marx called human emancipation. This is not how Nietzsche's madman presents the matter. For Nietzsche, the death of God, by which he means the collapse of serious belief in God. Men and women were still going to churches, but nothing in their lives corresponded to taking seriously Ribono Shel Haolam. The God is the sovereign of the universe. Nietzsche's madman regards this death of God as a catastrophe for the human spirit. Everything great, everything wonderful, everything noble, all love, all things high and exalted, lose their foundation, lamented the madman. And he even goes so far as to say in this parable that the only fitting response to the death of God, that is the discovery that God has always been a human creation, an illusion created by human beings for our benefit, is, says Nietzsche's madman, the creation of sacred games and festivals of atonement. This became a very important passage to me because I observed, with the help of some great readers of political philosophy, great scholars, I noticed that even at this crucial moment in lamenting the death of God, but confirming the death of God, Nietzsche could not escape the gravitational pull of religious language to describe the task imposed upon us. This led me to the conclusion, again, to make a long story short, that the tradition that Nietzsche thought that he had transcended had not been transcended by him and deserved a reconsideration.
So having said that about the impact of that thinking and where we are today in our society, I just kind of want to zoom out and zoom over to the Islamic world. What is going on there? And I know that many of the extremists in the Islamic world have been exported to Europe and even to America, sadly. But in the Middle East and North Africa, even in Indonesia and other places, what's going on? Is there some sort of a renaissance that we might be on the cusp of that would make a cultural difference, where we would see a different an era of prosperity, or are we going back to the Middle Ages?
So, uh, if this was a planned question, couldn't have been debated better. I'm so delighted by it, and I'll tell you why. Really, so delighted. First, we have a lot to fear from Islamic extremism. Islamism. Islamism is actually, as a historical matter, partly fueled by European existential thought. Sayyid Qutb, a mastermind of the Muslim Brotherhood or I should say, a master intellectual of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, studied abroad. Others learned a great deal from the critique of the West that one finds in thinkers like Heidegger. And they combined it with an imperative they also found in Heidegger, the great German philosopher, to return to foundations. And they returned to what they regard as a pure, original understanding of Islam, uninflected by centuries of interpretation. I should say, in some cases, modification, moderation, and that Islamism, actually like Heidegger's philosophy, is intensely hostile to much of the modern West. Treats the modern West as the enemy, and it treats Israel and the United States as exemplars. So that when you hear today about Israel as a settler colonialist society and the United States as the great settler colonialist society, our intellectuals are saying something similar to that which is said by Islamist clerics and intellectuals. They have a common root in High German philosophy. And I don't have to tell you all about the dangers. Iran has been for many years had been conducting a seven-front war against the Jewish state. This exploded on October 7th, 2023. The war still wages. It's down to six fronts because the Iran-backed Assad regime in Syria collapsed. That doesn't mean that Israel's out of danger on that front because Sunni jihadists have taken over. We could say more about that. But you mentioned Indonesia. I want to say something about Indonesia. First, I want to observe what is not well appreciated. The majority of the world's Muslims do not live in the Middle East and North Africa. The majority of the world's Muslims live in the Indo-Pacific area. The most populous Muslim country in the world is Indonesia. It's got around 200 million Muslims in Indonesia alone. And I want to focus on Indonesia for a moment because the Pompeo State Department, and specifically the Commission on Unalienable Rights, enjoyed it is an important breakthrough actually with Indonesia. Indonesia is home to 100 of the 200 million Muslims in Indonesia belong to an organization called Nahdlatul Ulama. 2 or 3 weeks after the Commission on Unalienable Rights published a report in the summer of 2020, I received an email at my office in the State Department from a advisor to the head of Nahdlatul Ulama. Remember, an organization of 100 million Muslims. And the email said, explained what Nahdlatul Ulama was, said that their brand of Islam emphasizes toleration and pluralism, and that they found in our commission's report, it was a commission chaired by a great woman named Marianne Glendon, longtime professor at Harvard Law School. They said that the report's understanding of human rights in the American tradition corresponded to their own understanding of human rights. And they wanted to work with us, and they issued an invitation to come to Jakarta. And indeed, in the end, Secretary Pompeo did go to Jakarta to present the report. to Nahdlatul Ulama, and Secretary Pompeo in his way, and Marianne Glendon in my way. We continue to work with Nahdlatul Ulama on the basis of this report. They are very keen to continue to work with the United States based on the conception of human rights that is not the one we're familiar with, which is associated with uh, uh, a progressive platform and a determination to use human rights to advance a progressive partisan agenda, but rather with the original conception of unalienable rights that is declared in our Declaration of Independence and to which our Constitution is devoted to enacting and protecting. In fact, Marianne and I will return to Jakarta this summer to teach in an educational academy. So, like so many things, Islam worldwide is a mixed bag. The threat of Islamism remains great and concrete, and Israel continues to fight against it. But I regard Nahdlatul Ulama as a sign of great hope that there are important strands within Islam determined to to emphasize those aspects of Islam which are highly compatible with a world in which nation states respect basic rights and fundamental freedoms.
So does that make you optimistic then?
To that I say, the challenges that we face are so great that I have neither time for optimism nor pessimism. I have only time for tasks. And working with Nahdlatul Ulama, I think, is a very important task because I believe they have a lot to contribute.
Skipping back to the current moves going on in our country, how do you feel about the Trump 2 administration's approach to DEI on campuses?
I strongly support its repudiation of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The general sensibility of DEI has been around for a long time. DEI got it crystallized under a new guise, especially in the post-George Floyd era. But it is a wonderful example of Orwellian speak, that is, using words whose original meaning is quite fine, but for the opposite purposes. In the diversity and equity and inclusion world, diversity does not mean diversity, or it means diversity of skin color, but sameness of thought. Equity does not mean equality. Equity means distributing benefits and burdens based on race. And inclusion means excluding all people who think differently from progressive orthodoxy. This is how it plays out. This is how it is played out in government. This is how it plays out in big corporations. This is how it plays out in universities. As such, it is, even though one could trace back to how it arose out of, in some cases, admirable motives, in practice, it has become antithetical to the basic principles on which the country is based, the principles of a free society, and the principles of a liberal education. It has become positively hostile to merit, and we really cannot afford for our institutions of higher education, our law schools, our business schools, our medical schools, our engineering schools, our science departments, to treat merit as a construct of white guys. and therefore something to be deplored and set aside in order to ensure that the people who belong to historically discriminated against minorities are now represented in positions of power and prestige, at least equivalent to their proportions in the rest of society. What we need is our evaluations that don't focus on skin color, that do not focus on ethnicity, and instead treat each person as a special human being and try to figure out whether he or she has the specific sets of qualities, the excellences of mind and character for the tasks at hand. That's what we need.
So well said. So well said. I'm curious. I'm very curious. I'm about 80% the way through your beautiful book that you wrote about 15 years ago, I guess, Israel and the Struggle Over the International Laws of War. You talk a lot about what was going on in Gaza, world opinion at the time, the flotilla, the nonsense coming out of the United Nations. I mean, it's such a deja vu read at this moment in history. Yes. The disgustingness of world view toward Israel. Instead of valuating Israel as really an inspiration and something that others should use as a benchmark. Even in times of war, in my view, the world has, and I know I'm preaching to the choir right now, the world has turned in a disgusting, sickening, asinine way against the only tiny, tiny Jewish state. I just want to say one other piece of facts before you respond. In Greater Cairo, there are more Muslims than there are Jews in the entire world. It's an interesting fact. And Israel, a country of only 7 million Jews, is doing a phenomenal job under the most difficult situations and environments. You really spell it out in a legalistic way, making a strong case for what Israel was doing, more than a decade ago, almost 2 decades ago, in the struggles of those times. And how does what you wrote at that time play out in your mind right now? And what do you think about the echoes that are happening?
As the great Yogi Berra said, deja vu all over again. Yes. So my little book, thank you for opening it, deals with the Gaza flotilla controversy, and even more importantly, the controversy over the Goldstone report, which arose out of Israel's Mifsa Ofer Yitzuka Operation Cast Lead, late 2008, early 2009, in which the IDF entered Gaza to silence the rockets and mortar that Hamas was firing indiscriminately at Israeli civilians and civilian infrastructure. And the book makes 2 arguments: that the Goldstone report was a disgrace, the evidence was manufactured, the legal analysis was inferior, and second, that in extraordinarily difficult circumstances, Israel's conduct was exemplary. Now, by exemplary, I don't mean perfect. It's inconceivable that an army defending itself in urban warfare would not have some soldiers who not only push the outside of the envelope, but commit what are considered as war crimes. That happens in war. But in evaluating Israel's conduct, we have to take two things into account. One is, how does Israel measure up to other armies in similar circumstances? And the short answer to that question is spectacularly well. I had friends from Israel who told me that from the military, and they told me they would make visits to the United States in the years following Operation Cast Lead. They'd say that counterparts in the Pentagon would say to them, "Hey, guys, go a little bit easy on it. You're raising the standard so high that the next time we go into urban warfare, we're going to face new restrictions, new challenges, new requirements." But second, now put this in a way that I hesitate to put the matter this way in the presence of a rabbi, but I'm going to do it anyway. You could summarize the entirety of the laws of war, which fill dozens and dozens of volumes, while standing on one foot. How? The laws of war command us to balance humanitarian responsibility with military necessity. That's it. All the rest is interpretation, to paraphrase a famous rabbinic teaching. Okay. Why am I telling you this now? Because many of the people who write about Israel's alleged war crimes, then in 2009 and 2010, today, as Israel exercises its legitimate right of self-defense, may know a fair amount about humanitarian responsibility, but they know next to nothing about military necessity. Now, if you know next to nothing about military necessity, you are unqualified to do the one thing, really, that the international laws of war, the law of armed conflict, command you to do. Undertake a balancing test. So here is how Israel is routinely convicted of war crimes in not only in the International Court of Public Opinion, but in international tribunals. It is pointed out that in the war in which Israel is involved, Palestinians die, or a lot of Palestinians die, or Palestinian infrastructure is destroyed, or a lot of Palestinian infrastructure is destroyed. In itself, these true and tragic observations mean nothing from the point of view, in and of themselves, mean nothing from the point of view of a determination. Because what we want to know is, what were the implications of military necessity? What we want to know is, in pursuing its legitimate military objective, that is protecting its own civilians and its own political society from the genocidal aims of Hamas. What we want to know is, was Israel using force that was proportional to those legitimate aims? Now, if Hamas had placed its bases separate from the civilian population, which they are required to do by the international laws of war, many fewer Palestinians would have died.
Dayenu.
Hamas, in positioning not only its soldiers, its rockets and mortars and missiles, its launchers, its vehicles inside civilian areas, effectively transform them into battle zones. So from my point of view, and I believe this is the correct point of view, the carnage, the destruction in Gaza, tragic as it is all of it presumptively the moral and legal responsibility of Hamas. Because Hamas, contrary to the laws of war, is conducting its military operations inside Gaza. Now, that doesn't mean that any particular Israeli soldier or officer might not transgress the laws of war, but presumptively, it's Hamas. I should also add, having said all that, I believe the numbers are something like this. In America's last serious bout of urban warfare in Iraq, Mosul Fallujah, I believe the ratio of combatant to non-combatant deaths was in the neighborhood of 1 to 6. Might have been a little lower, might have been a little higher. That means for every 1 combatant killed, 6 non-combatants were killed. I believe that ratio, even taking Hamas's unreliable numbers for Israel, is something like 1 to 2. In other words, Israel has beat all the competition in conditions that are much more adverse for Israel in urban warfare. In the United States, in Mosul and Fallujah, did not confront hundreds of miles of tunnels that had been constructed over the course of 20 years. So it is incompatible with the very idea of war to find a perfect military. And you all and your listeners, I hope, will forgive me for descending into the cliche that still Israel's conduct in Gaza is favorably compared with any army who's faced even remotely considerable urban warfare.
That cliche is fact. So
True.
well, Peter, we're coming down to our time limit here, so I want to just fire a couple questions at you, and maybe Avi has another couple more, Barry Weiss style speed round questions.
Go for it.
All right. Okay, I guess it's not really Barry Weiss style speed round, but if we're trying to help educate our peers, our families, people around us about this stuff, where would you suggest we turn the average citizens for information to become a better electorate? Do you have any media sources, books, whatever comes to mind? I'm curious what you recommend.
Are we talking now again about the United States citizenship? Are we talking about Israel?
So I guess whatever bubbles to the surface, all of the above.
Yeah. Well, first on America, we need to read more history. Everybody needs to read more history, certainly in the schools. I work with and I support the various initiatives underway to promote the study of civics and in higher education and in K through 12. But from my point of view, the true education for citizenship is liberal education, of which the study of the principles of American government is one part. But I would like students also to read American literature. I would also I would like all students in America to grow up with an acquaintance with the Bible. I don't want our public schools teaching the Bible as faith, because it turns out we Americans differ about what God wants from us. Turns out we Jews do too. And the last organization I want adjudicating that dispute, the schools. But the Bible is also a text that has had enormous influence on Western civilization. It's actually a key to a lot of literature. So I want that taught too. I want religion taught, history taught. I want to return to the basic subjects, not I think because I'm a fuddy-duddy, but precisely because I value freedom, and I think fellow citizens will not only acquire a greater gratitude for the freedom they have, but become better at taking advantages of freedom with this sort of education. So start by reading history, reading American history. Second, make sure that your daily dose of news intake involves a variety of perspectives. I do not say this because some of my acquaintance will think, because I'm a relativist. Perish the thought. I have a few strong opinions myself, but it's because I've been convinced by John Stuart Mill that most of the time, our own opinions are incomplete, and they can be supplemented by what we hear from a variety of opinions, and that most of the time, even opinions that we think are quite weak, people hold them for some reason. It's good to understand that. And even if our opinions are pure as can be, and other people's opinions are manifestly wrong, the exercise of explaining to ourselves or in conversation with friends why we're so right and they're so wrong is a good exercise, because it turns our opinions, which might have hardened into dogma, into living, flexible, resilient opinions again, which we can apply here and there. So make sure you get a daily dose of alternative opinions as well. And for those who want a complete curriculum, I'm happy to correspond with you by email.
Wonderful. So last question for me. Have you ever had a conversation with Tyler Cowen? Do you know who Tyler Cowen is?
Yes, of course. In fact, we for a while we were colleagues at the same university.
That's why I asked. When you mentioned that, it came to mind. I hear him say that, and he's such an amazing
polymath.
Yeah.
Yes. A remarkable guy for sure.
My question here, and a little rapid fire question as we prepare to conclude, is our common dear friend, Chef Yair Luria. The great. What is your favorite dish?
No. You cannot do that. Sorry. This is not a dodge. I will only say I have had many meals produced by Yair, and I haven't had a one that is anything short of spectacular.
Wow.
That's as far as I'll go.
All right. I love it. We're so grateful to you for spending time with us and to grace our podcast here, the Horizontal Conversations, with your insight, with your wisdom, with your depth of experience. And we wish you, and we pray that we will, not only you, but our whole society, our country here, will be blessed with only goodness, revealed goodness, no hidden goodness, and a beautiful rest of these times ahead.
Yes, let's all get together with Yair soon.
That sounds like a good plan.